Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. I just literally walked into the house. I look like a mess. There's a story behind it, and I'll tell you in just a moment. But first, I must share all of this with the medias of social. 1 second, please. We'll find me here. That library. No, you. Let's see. It says I'm live now, which is good. Hello, Ms. Whiskey. Hello. Share. Facebook. We go live. Oops, let's see. Sorry, everybody. I am still not quite at the right time zone. I am way messed up from everything. As you know, I've just moved to New Orleans, and I will post that there. And let me post over here just a second to the other one. And of course, my internet is not working. Let's see. Hey Siri, set an alarm for 9 o'clock p.m.
I can't set an alarm here. How about a reminder? Okay.
All right. Okay. Now that we have that part taken care of, I've gotten all of the medias of socials and all of that. It's very late for me, and I have a beach trip and 2 hours I need to wake up. Oh, goodness. But of course, I want to catch it live. I'm so glad I'm here again. Glad to see you. Sadly, I have to go to work. I look forward to watching this later. That's all right, my dear. Mike Pope, hello. You did make it. Hello, hello, hello. Let me see if I can expand the screen. I literally just walked in the door. I'm trying to figure out how I can expand this screen. It doesn't matter. You know what? It really doesn't matter. It's fine. You can see me. I can see you. We're going to read anyway. So I'm still on New York time, and I was supposed to have dinner with my friend, which is really funny because this would have not made any sense. But I was supposed to have dinner with my friends, P and I. That's her name, P, and I completely. It just slipped my mind. I see her text and I went, "Oh, I've got to get down there." And so I sped down, and then I said, "But I can only stay for like 15 minutes because I forgot." You know how we used to do story time at 10 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, and then we moved it to 9 p.m. so that it'd be better for both coasts. Well, now New Orleans, Louisiana, is an hour behind New York, so I'm all kinds of befuddled. Anyway, I am here in New Orleans. This is my seance room. It is the most well lit room. I'm going to show you a little bit here. This is the front parlor. This is my seance room, but we're going to be reading a different kind of reading today. Good evening, John Maxwell. Oh gosh, I wandered off, so it was a minute late. Boy, I did make it just in time. Melissa, hello. Love the background. Thank you. These are my paintings. Judgy Goat was ripped off the wall by a very judgy poltergeist, but we've had a little talk, and I don't think I'll have any more issues. What else did I miss here? Siobhan, take good care. Rest one of these days. Yes. Let's see. Kelly, hello, hello. So believe me, I understand discombobulated. Yes, indeed, indeed. Good evening, Angela Bowling. Okay, now, Matthew, I saw yours is here too. Hello, my friend, looking great. Thank you so much. I'm not wearing a stick of makeup, not that it would matter because it would melt off of my face anyway. So now you get to see me in my unembalmed phase. Christy Cragen, hello. New Orleans seems really cool. I hate where I am. Swear this town only NPCs. Well, thank you, Christy. Thank you, Lightning in the Dark. I love New Orleans. The heat. It is taking some getting used to, but I do love New Orleans. Even in the bad neighborhoods, it is a beautiful, beautiful city. Matthew says, the other day it was a different hot day in Salem, and I thought my face was going to run into Derby Street. Well, global warming and whatnot. But well, they say it's hotter than Satan's butthole, I think is what they say. But that's okay. It's fine. I am enjoying it. I don't mind the heat. You know what they say? If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. Princess says you don't need it. I agree. Thank you so much. All right, my lovelies. Without further ado, I think we should get into this week's story. And the funny thing is, I brought my book with me just in case I had to read it right there in the cafe, because I did not want to miss it tonight. Oh, I should have grabbed some water. If you will pardon me for just 30 seconds, I'm going to need a drink. I'll be right back. 30 seconds. Okay, I am back. Thank you, everybody. Okay. This is actually apple juice. Ms. Whiskey forgot to bring poison. I did too. All right, my lovelies. I do have a little bit of glow. It may be the heat, and also maybe these lovely orange fire lamps. All right. Now, without further ado, my darlings, Chapter 12. Janet raced to the swinging door and pushed it open. Raja was coming down the hall, but she boldly started past him. He snarled so fiercely, however, that he forced her, quivering and frightened, back into the big room. Again and again, she tried to get past him, but each time he leaped to his hind feet and with snapping jaws made her go back. On his hind legs, he was as tall as she. Don't cross him, child. Don't cross Raja. Come here and sit quietly by me. Obediently, Janet sank into her chair. Her lips were trembling and her eyes were wide with fear. She was tearing nervously at a small handkerchief until the sheer fabric fell in ribbons in her lap. I don't understand, she murmured. I don't understand. I told you there would be many things you wouldn't understand, my child, Miss Bosvane sighed. Her face, as Janet glanced quickly at her, seemed grayer than it had been that morning. Nita brought the dinner tray and started placing the hot dishes on the table. I can't eat, Janet said weakly. I can't. Neither can I. Nita, take the things away, please. Miss Bosvane's hand gestured helplessly. If you would only tell me where Mr. Rodman... Hush, don't mention his name again. But I warn you. Can't I go outside? Anything to get out of this horrible room? Raja will not let you leave. Janet started to sob softly, now and then wiping her eyes with her torn handkerchief. Where had Blair Rodman gone? Why wasn't he coming back? And why had Miss Bosvane said she could never see him again? 1,000 questions came to her mind that she could not answer, Had something happened to the man who had come up so valiantly to see her? She looked resentfully at the woman sitting in the big chair. You are cruel, she cried helplessly. You are mean and hateful. No, no, child, came an indistinct murmur, and her narrow eyes opened slowly. I am not. I have nothing to do with this. She glanced nervously at the tapestry, her fatigue seemingly gone. Then she sank feebly against the back of her chair again. Oh, you are! You have everything in the world to do with this, Janet cried vehemently. You are keeping me here against my will, and I hate you! Miss Bosvain did not answer. Her head fell forward on her breast, and her eyes were closed. Janet thought she was not breathing. She arose and went to feel her hands. They were icy cold. Miss Bosvain had fainted. The girl jingled the silver bell on the table and called loudly, Nita! The servant, she thought, as she had rubbed the old woman's hands with her own trembling ones, was a long time coming, yet she dared not run to get her as Raja was watching her closely. Again and again she called, jingling the silver bell frantically. There was not a sign of life in the woman's large body. If her heart was beating, the girl could not hear it. Janet tried to find the combination to drop the chair back, hoping to make her more comfortable. When she could not, she quickly drew up a footstool and lifted Miss Bosvain's feet up on it. As she felt the woman's heart, her hand touched the cold chameleon, and she drew back hastily. Eyeing the reptile with disgust, its red tongue was beating the air wildly. No water in the room with which she could bathe the sick woman's face, nothing, no smelling salts or restoratives. She shouted again for Nita, louder this time. Fear lending her screams a piercing tone that startled her. 10 minutes passed, then 15. She noted by the banjo clock on the wall. The minutes ticked away slowly. Too slowly. They seemed years. Miss Bosvain was very still. There was not a flutter of her pinkish eyelashes. Then, at last, Nita entered the room. Janet ran to her, thankfully, tears in her eyes. Miss Bosvain has fainted. She may be dead. Raja wouldn't let me run and find you. I called and called. Swiftly, Nita bent over the prostrate figure of her mistress, felt her cold hands, and then placed her hand over Miss Bosvain's heart, shaking her head. She hurried to the kitchen and came back almost immediately with a pitcher of water and some white powder in a tall glass. Janet thought she had never seen anyone tender and loving, seen anyone so tender and loving as Nita, as she bathed Miss Bosvain's temples and gently pressed the glass of medicine to her lips. Her face seemed transfigured with kindness, and the lines that were so hard softened perceptibly. Once, when she looked up at Janet from her knees, the girl saw a film of tears in her small brown eyes. Her grief was silent, still, because she could not talk. There was no audible weeping. You love her very much, don't you, Nita? Janet asked softly. Nita nodded, and with her coarse, work-stained fingers brushed the tears from her eyes. For half an hour, the two tried to revive Miss Bosvain, Janet obeying silently the gestures Nita gave. The only way she could tell the girl what she wanted. Raja was still by the fireplace, watching Janet, his eyes never leaving her face. When she had occasion to walk around him, she shivered slightly. Miss Bosvain had told her the dog hated her. She could feel it, see it in his eyes. Miss Bosvain's eyelids fluttered, and her breast it moved slightly. Nita was soothing her temples, and Janet was rubbing her wrists. Her eyes opened and looked around vaguely. What happened? She murmured, so low the two could hardly hear her. You fainted, Miss Bosvain. Do you feel better now? Janet answered. No. It must be my heart. Don't you think we should have a doctor? No. Came again from Miss Bosevane's blue lips. No. I'm going to die anyway. But Nita, and the girl turned to the servant, we must have a doctor. Nita looked inquiringly at her mistress. Again, Miss Bosevane feebly shook her head. I want to die, child. I have been wanting to die for a long time. Years, years. She stopped, too weak to go on. Janet saw a frightened look in Nita's face, a look of terror that passed almost as soon as it came. The servant was herself again and began undressing the big woman with Janet's help. Miss Bosevane was almost totally helpless now, so weak she could hardly move her arms or turn her head. Nita left the room when the sick woman was comfortable to make a cup of tea for her at Janet's suggestion. Can't you try to sleep for a while, Miss Bosevane? The girl urged. She felt pity for this woman whom she had said she hated not long while before. Indeed, she could feel nothing else. Her employer was so helpless, so ill. I can't sleep, child. If I could only die. I've been wanting it for so long. Hush! You are weakening yourself when you talk. Is Raja still here? Janet looked round. She had forgotten the dog entirely in the last few minutes, and now he was nowhere in sight. No, Miss Bosevane. Miss Bosevane seemed happier at her answer, and smiled a wan, feeble smile. Don't hate me, child, the blue lips murmured. Don't hate me. If you would only understand. Only understand. All this isn't my fault. I'm so sorry. And Janet, strangely enough, was, although she could not understand why she was. She had hated this woman so fiercely before, and now she felt sorry, terribly sorry for her. My life has been so unhappy. I've tried so hard and I've failed in everything. I think you would be better someplace else, out of this house, Miss Bosevane. No. It was the same every place. Paris, always the same, always the same. It will be the same as long as I live. There is a curse on my life. A curse. Janet put her hand on the woman's forehead and tried to keep her quiet, but Miss Bosevane talked on in broken, disjointed sentences. I've tried to die. My curse won't let me. I've taken poison time and time again. I have some in that drawer on the table at my side. Every night I take out the poison. It's in a small silver vial. I look at it, but I know it's useless. It will not kill me. I was dying today, a while ago, and I was jerked back to life again. Life. I don't want life. I hate it. Poor thing, Janet whispered, half aloud, half to herself. Look into my crystal, child. I cannot see it. The girl took the cold hand on which the crystal ring was held, and held it close to her. Do not touch it, child. Don't touch my hand as you look at it. Then it will be my thought you see in the ring. Janet dropped the hand gently and bent over it. She could see nothing, only the depths of the crystal, like clear, placid water. There's nothing, she reported. Nothing that I can see. It is clear. It is never clear for me, my child. Look again. She peered again, but the stone was still clear. Gradually, however, a face took shape, red, bristling hair above it, a face with green eyes. It was the face she herself had seen once before in the crystal. Drawing back, she faltered. The face, the man you said was your father, I see him. A little moan escaped Miss Bosevane's lips. She closed her eyes. Look again, child. Janet obeyed. The face was still there, small but clear. The lips, she thought, were drawn in a sneer, thick, sensuous lips. The same face. That's all. It's always there for me, child. Always. I thought you might see death there. A relief from this. Nita came in with tea, and she lifted the sick woman in her strong arms while Janet held her cup of steaming tea to her lips. Miss Bosvain swallowed some of it. Her color seemed better, but she was still weak. Thank you, she smiled at the servant. Is there anything you want, Miss Bosvain? Janet asked. Nothing, only to die. If you could give me that. The girl turned away and looked at Nita. She was standing, her hands at her sides, her head bowed. Run out in the sun, child. I want to rest. But I think I should stay and take care of you. Run out. I want to be alone for a little while. Janet followed Nita into the kitchen. As soon as they were there, she faced the servant squarely. We should take her to a doctor, she insisted. Nita shook her head dolorously. But Nita, there is something serious the matter with Miss Bosvain. That was a bad heart attack she had. Nita answered her by going to the door and looking out. When she came back, she sank wearily in the chair and put her head in her hands. Her shoulders were heaving, yet not a sound came from her. How can we get a doctor? Again, the servant shook her head and looked at Janet. Tears were streaming down her face, and her tightly closed lips were trembling. Nita, tell me, the girl urged. Tell me where Mr. Rodman is. Write it down for me, won't you? Nita turned. A shiver ran over her big frame. If Nita could only talk, if she could only tell me. Janet searched frantically in the kitchen for a bit of paper and pencil. She could find neither. Discouraged, she knelt at Nita's feet. Please, Nita, tell me about this mad house. What's the matter with everyone? You and Miss Bosvain and Raja? Am I dreaming, or is all this true? I can't believe it. Nita lifted the girl by the arms gently and led her to the door and out into the back. Then she turned and went back into the house. Janet walked around listlessly for a while. Blair Rodman had come and gone. He might be waiting out here for her. Might be. Although Miss Bosvain had said she would never see him again. She had sent him outside, telling him Janet would follow in a few minutes, and he had gone. Yet by some chance, he might be waiting for her still. Gathering hope, she hurried through the garden, peering into the bushes as she went. Presently, she came around to the front. His car was standing on the path near the porch. He must be here looking for her. Miss Bosvain had lied. She would see him again. Hurrying around to the other side, she kept calling, Mr. Rodman! Mr. Rodman! There was no answer to her cries, nothing but the faraway call of a bird somewhere in the deep forest. Chapter 13. Blair was just coming to his senses. He groaned as he turned over. His head ached fiercely with a throbbing, steady pain. He had never felt such terrible pain before. He tried to move his hand, but could not. It was dark. He could see nothing around him. Something wet and warm on his fingers. He moved one of them, and the wet, warm feeling was still there. Where was he? What had happened? Too tired to think, he closed his eyes again, but the pain in his head racked him, and he moaned aloud. He had come to see Janet Lord. Janet, a nice name, and it fitted her so. Hair like sunshine she had, and deep violet eyes. He had seen her again, but where? Yes, he had come to the house, Miss Bosvain's house. Why was his brain whirling so? He couldn't think straight. He couldn't move. And his head was bursting open. Where was he? He had come to Miss Bosevane's house to see Janet. Even in his agony, her name was sweet to him. He tried to say it aloud, but couldn't. He had seen her again. He was sure of that. She was pleased to see him. Her hand, when she gave it to him, thrilled him. He remembered he had never wanted to let it go. There was a happy smile on her face when she came to greet him. Miss Bosvane, he had seen her again too. She looked the same as he remembered, except that her face seemed sickly to him. Her color was bad. Miss Bosvane, it was her house. The note asking him to dinner, the dog. He had not noticed the dog around. Yes, he had. Then what was next? Yes, Miss Bosvane had kindly suggested he talk to Janet outside, alone, or had he thought of it? Everything was so hazy, except Janet's sweet face. Well, he went out of the room through the swinging door. Miss Bosvane had pointed to it, a swinging door, that was clear. He had been thinking of Janet. Yes, Janet. Then he remembered no more, except that there had been a frightful pain, and then sleep. Pain? Was he ill? A little stronger, he attempted to feel his head again. Where the pain was the worst, he could not get his hand up. Something was keeping it down in that wet, warm thing. His feet, he could not move either, and his ankles ached, but did not pain as his head did. Why couldn't he move? Was he paralyzed? What had happened after he left Miss Bosvane's big living room, where Janet was smiling at him happily? Lying quite still, he tried to puzzle it out, but the more he thought about it, the more muddled he became. He couldn't move. His head pained. God! He was bound, his wrists and his ankles, rope all around his body. The wet, warm thing was his blood. He had been struck in the head, and his head was bleeding. Blair was himself in an instant, and his mind working fast, his pulse leaping. He had been struck when he went out the swinging door into another room, as soon as he was out of the living room, struck on the head. He was losing blood rapidly. He was tied up so he couldn't get away. But who had struck him? He had seen no one. He could not even visualize the room into which he had walked after he had left the living room. His assailant must have been waiting for him on the outside of the door. Janet was still in his mind. As she had left the room, he was thinking of nothing else. Janet. But who had struck him in the head? Miss Bosvane? Janet and Nita were all in the living room. He had no idea how long he had been unconscious. Hours, perhaps, because it was 1 o'clock when he entered the big house for dinner. 1 o'clock, and now it was dark. Hours probably had passed since he had been struck. Hours because it was night now. He was alone someplace. With his fingers he felt the floor. It was of rough board, slivery and crude. He could make out slivery and crude. He could make out no windows, nothing in the place where he lay. Did Janet know about this? He decided he could not know. She could not know. What might she have gone through if he had had such treatment? He should have taken a posse up to the house instead of coming alone. He might be useless now. He could not move. He could see nothing. His eyes tried to peer through the darkness, but they saw nothing. It was as if he were blind. Not a second could he hear. Not a sound could he hear, and not even a song of a cricket. Again, he tried to move his hands, but they were tied firmly against his body. He could feel the rope with his fingers. It was strong, heavy rope. Whoever had tied him up had made a good job of it. McClure had said there were only 2 people in that house, 3 now that Janet was there. No, he was wrong. McClure had taken up the girl who had never come back, a girl who was to have been Miss Bosvane's companion. That made 4 in the house, if that first girl was still there. McClure did not even know her name or where she had come from. Who could have struck him with such a blow? Blair was feeling more like himself, except that he was still weak, probably from the loss of blood. His head seemed to be splitting wide open. He thought he heard a slight noise in the distance, the sound of a door opening. Perhaps. Yes, there were footsteps coming near, soft ones, as if the person had rubber soles on their shoes. Someone was near, in the room. If it was a room where he was, he could hear the intake of breath, but he could see nothing. Perhaps this person would stumble over him. Blair said not a word, but his eyes were wide open, looking into the darkness. His visitor was standing above him now. He could feel a presence and hear the others breathing, plainly, but he could see nothing. The darkness was so intense. "Who are you?" he finally asked. His voice sounded weak, a voice he hardly recognized as his own. Yet it had come from his own lips. There was no answer to that question. "Who are you?" he repeated, this time a little stronger. He felt a cruel kick at his face and then heard soft footsteps away from him. The door closed. Silence as it had been before. Someone had come and gone, and the someone had kicked him viciously. His knee pained him where the blow had fallen. This must be the assailant come to see how he was. Yet this person had not seemed to stumble in the darkness. Whoever it was, he or she, knew the place well. Was it a woman? Blair thought of the two big women in the house, Nita and Miss Bosvane. Either of them could have struck that blow, but of them, though, both of them, though, had been in the living room when the blow had been struck. He had a faint feeling that the blow had come from the front. Yes, the front of his head pained the most. That meant that his assailant had been in the room he had entered. If the blow had come from behind, the back of his head would pain more. No, the blow had come in his front. Miss Bosvane, he remembered, was sitting in her big chair by the fireplace. She could hardly have jumped up and reached the other room in time to hit him. Nita had been standing with a tray in her hands near the table. She would have had to have put the tray down. No, neither Nita nor Miss Bosvane could have struck that sudden blow. Whoever had hit him was waiting for him in that other room. There must be someone else in this house. McClure, too, had said the other girl he took up there was a little thing. That blow had taken strength, and a lot of it. Funny. His mysterious visitor had not said a word. Chapter 14. All evening, Janet remained in the living room at Miss Bosvane's side. Now and then she would walk to the table to the front window and look out to see if Blair Rodman's car was still there. Each time she went, she made it out in the darkness beside the porch. Raja had gone out an hour after Nita had brought the tea and cakes in. Called by the whistle, she was beginning to fear, and yet welcome, because every time she heard it, Raja hurried away out of her sight. Miss Bosvane was weak and still very ill. She lay in her chair, her eyes open, looking at the ceiling, paying no attention to the girl. Nita had been busy all evening in the kitchen. This left Janet alone with her employer. Mr. Rodman's car in front. Then he must be in the house somewhere. Fidgeting constantly in her mind, fidgeting constantly in her hard, uncomfortable chair, she considered the possibility of asking Miss Bosvane if she could hunt for him. All Miss Bosvane could do was refuse. However, she hated to bother the woman. She was obviously so ill, and with Nita in the kitchen, she should stay with her. It was her duty. At hour intervals, she gave the sick woman the white powder Nita had set out. It was 10 by the banjo clock when Miss Bosvane's eyes closed and she fell asleep. Janet knew she was sleeping from the regularity of her breathing and the slight snores that escaped her lips now and then. The girl looked down at her lying in the improvised bed, her grayish red hair falling over her pillow. her thick and coarse and long. She had long since retracted her opinion that Miss Bosvane was mad. She was not. It was the house. There was really something queer about it, something that made Miss Bosvane fear it. She, who was so strong in mind and yet not in body, something that made Nita fear it too. Nita, who was so able and who loved her mistress so much. It was the house, because she felt it now. There was something safe about the big room, something safe except when Raja was present. Then, even this room took on tension, as if it were a living, breathing thing capable of human nerves. The chameleon was nestled in a fold of Miss Bosvane's nightdress, white now and sleeping, a charm Miss Bosvane had told Janet, a charm against Raja the dog. At least Raja did not go near the woman who avoided her pointedly. Nita, he snarled at viciously, as if he hated her too, as he hated Janet. Where had Miss Bosvane found this dog? Why? Janet stopped helplessly. There were too many things she could not understand, so many that her mind was constantly seething with unanswered questions. Miss Bosvane did not stir in her sleep. Not so much as a finger of her hand moved, as she was probably exhausted. I could look in the house for Blair Rodman, the girl thought. While she is sleeping, I could take a candle. Raja is out of the way. Quietly lighting a small candle, she gave a last look at Miss Bosvane and let herself slowly out the swinging door. She was in the hall, which was lighted dimly from the candle she held in her hand. Nita seemed to be her friend. She would first go in and ask her if it would be possible. In a moment, she was in the kitchen. It was empty. Nita was gone. Worried, Janet stood, candle in her hand, near the stove, which held a dying fire. Nita was gone. With a quick movement, she went into the hall again and slipped off her Oxfords. Miss Bosvane would not awaken while she was gone. She was in her first sound sleep. Up the stairs she crept, one at a time, the candle high over her head. She was nearly up the first flight when she heard her name called weakly. "Miss Lord? Child!" It was Miss Bosvane. A little discouraged, the girl ran down and entered the living room from the door. She could see her employer looking at her, her eyes wide open. "Where are you going, child?" her feeble voice asked. Embarrassed because she held her slipper in her hand, Janet came toward the fireplace. "I was going upstairs to see if I could find Mr. Rodman. I thought you were asleep." "I was, but I awaken at the slightest unusual sound. You must not go now, child. Wait until I give you leave. And when you go, do not take a light." Obediently, Janet put down the candle and put on her Oxfords. "His car is still in the front, Miss Bosvane, so he must be in the house someplace. You see, I'm used to sounds in the house. If I hear anything unusual, I always awaken. I was very quiet, I know, but I heard you. Nita was not in the kitchen." "No, Nita was not in the kitchen. I was going to ask her." "I know, child. She'll be back presently. She has duties at night." "Roger was gone, so I thought it would be safe. He's never far away. I caught you just in time. Go see if Nita is back yet, please." Janet took the candle and went again into the kitchen. The big servant was just entering the back door. "Miss Bosvane wants you. She just awakened." The two of them went immediately to the living room. "Are you through?" Nita nodded in the affirmative. "Can you drive a car?" That question was directed to Janet in a hoarse whisper. "Oh, can you drive a car?" "I used to long ago, but I haven't tried for years," the girl replied. Well, then you can get away in Mr. Rodman's car now. Hurry if you wish to go. You may have half an hour, that's all." Miss Bosevane's eyes closed. "But you must start quietly and leave with your lights off." "But Miss Bosevane, Mr. Rodman, I can't leave him here." "Your only chance, child. Hurry. Do not stop for your things." Janet looked around the room frantically. Should she try? When she reached Bosevane, she could send someone back for Blair Rodman. Should she go and leave him now, when he had come to take her away? "Go," the woman commanded. "I will." But as she reached the door, she stopped with her hand on the knob. She had heard a noise outside, a noise like an engine starting. Hastily, she tore open the door and looked out. Blair Rodman's car was halfway down the road. She could just see a flashing object through the tall grass. "Something is driving it away," she cried. "It must be Mr. Rodman." Nita was hurrying to the door. After one glance, she came back to her mistress and stood at her side, impassive. Although Janet watched until the car had vanished from sight, she could not distinguish anyone in the driver's seat. The night was very dark, and the lights of the car had not been turned on. "It must have been Mr. Rodman," she said, as she came back to Miss Bosevane's side. "No, child, it was not he. It was someone else," her employer murmured, her eyes still closed. "Who then?" "It was not Mr. Rodman. He's still here. I've been beaten again." She was in such evident distress that Janet said nothing more. How could she, when Miss Bosevane seemed so sincere? The car was gone, but Mr. Rodman had not taken it? Who then? Could the driver be? The car might have been stolen, but Janet dismissed the thought almost as soon as it came to her mind as too preposterous. Miss Bosevane knew who had taken the car, knew, but she would not say, regardless of her protestations, that she had and Nita were the only occupants of the house. Janet was positive that someone else lived there too. Someone whom Raja obeyed, someone whom both Nita and her mistress feared. The whistle, the footsteps outside her door, that terrible first night, the wild tune on the piano, the face at the tower window. Could it be that the face she had seen was that of this mysterious person whom Raja obeyed? Certainly, the dog did not take orders from Nita or Miss Bosevane. He ignored them. Someone else in the house. "You'd better get to bed, child," Miss Bosevane said softly. "I can't. Can't I sit up all night with you? You may need me." "Nita will stay good night." Janet looked indecisively at Nita. The servant nodded her head, agreeing with her mistress, and the girl made ready to leave the room. Nita preceded her as usual with a candle, escorting her up to the stairs. At the top, she handed her the light and vanished down the dark hallway. Janet entered her bare room, locked the door carefully, and sat on the edge of her cot. Someone else is in this house. She couldn't rid the thought from her mind. Suddenly arising, she walked to the door and tried it, but it was firmly locked, and the key turned. No one could possibly get through that door tonight. Yet last night, and the night before, her room had been entered. True, it had been simple the first night because she had no key, but last night she had locked the door securely, and in the morning she found the window open. Was there another entrance to the room? With her candle in her hand, she explored the clothes closet, which opened off the room to the north wall. No door there from the outside. She held the light high again to make sure. No door here. But on the paneled wall, she suddenly saw finger marks. She went carefully over the wall of the closet, but found the fingerprints only at one spot, near the molding of the panel. The rest of the paper was faded but clean. The marks were about the height of her shoulders and plainly visible in the candlelight. Quickly re-entering the bedroom, she looked over the walls there. Not a sign of finger mark. Another trip to the closet. She had placed her own fingers on the marks and pressed against the molding. The small panel slid back, and she was looking into darkness. Trembling a little, She slipped off her shoes and went forward slowly. She was in another bare room, a room she had investigated from the hall, the room adjoining hers. On the walls of the room, at exactly the height of the finger marks in her closet, she found other marks. Do not take a light, she remembered Miss Bosevane's warning, and she hastily returned to her room again and put the candle down in the middle of the floor. Then she slipped through the open panel again, closed it, and hurried through the door of the empty room into the hall. No sign of Raja. Not a sound broke the stillness of the house. She ascended the steps to the third floor, cautiously holding onto the railing for support. She could see nothing at all. There was a little draft on the floor of the third hall when she reached it, and her ankles began to get a little cold. At the top of the landing, she strained her eyes to look about, but could see nothing. As her eyes became accustomed to the darkness, she groped her way to the door and felt for a handle. There it was. The east tower was where she had seen that face. This door would not lead to it. She would have to go further. For a moment, she sat down on the floor to rest, listening for the warning of Raja would give as he bounded up the stairs. She heard nothing. She was safe for a little while. Noiselessly, she crept to the east side of the house and felt for a door. It was there. The end room, which must face the front. The tower was directly above it. She stopped to quiet her racing nerves. Perhaps there would be a staircase in this room. If she could find but a window and open it, she could see by the starlight or the moonlight. It might have risen a little. She found the window and pulled up the blind, but the shutters were too strong for her, and she gave up in despair. Ah, here was the door. Her hand had touched a cold, smooth knob. She turned it slowly, but the door did not open. It must have locked. All the other doors she had tried were open. All she had to do was to turn the handle. Again she tried, but with no success. The door was fastened tightly. Was that a sob she heard? She listened again. A slight noise came from above again, came to her ears. Yes, it was a sob, scarcely audible. She would never have heard it had not her senses been so keyed up by fright. She might have thought it was the wind. There was someone in that tower, someone, yet Blair Rodman's car had been driven away. Janet leaned against the door to puzzle out the problem. She had imagined that the person in the tower room had driven away the car, yet she had distinctly heard someone there just now. She scratched her nails against the wood of the door panel softly. A knock might be heard. Miss Bosvane had keen ears. Again, but she received no answer. Another sound froze her rigidly in her tracks, her hand poised in mid-air, the noise of the car racing near the house. Without hesitation, Janet hastily fled from the room, stumbled down the hall, found the stairs, and in a moment was on the second floor, panting breathlessly. She slid through the panel to her room and stood blinking in the feeble glow of the candle in her middle of the floor. The engine noise had stopped now. Still blinded by the light, she sat exhausted on the cot. 4 people, 5, perhaps 6 in this house. Herself, Miss Bosvane, Nita, the one in the tower, the driver of the car, and Blair Rodman, 6. 2 of them she had never seen. Dragging her cot over in front of the closet door, she sat, hunched despondently on the edge. The closet door opened into the room, so if anyone tried to enter the room this night, she would have to be awakened first. Why had she run away from the tower door? Fear, she decided, of being caught, not by Nita or Miss Bosvane, but by this mysterious person, this person she had never seen, the one Raja obeyed. Hardly had she thought of the dog than she heard him leaping heavy and lithe up the stairs. Then silence. He probably had lain down at her door to watch her for the night, unless to try to get out of the room again with Raja there. She would have to wait for morning before she searched for Blair Rodman. Warily, she undressed and soon was under the coarse blanket, but she could not sleep. The mad playing had started again on the living room piano. It could not be Miss Bosvane. She had been weak and ill when Janet left her. It was someone else. The girl thought the music was even more terrible tonight than it had been the previous evening. She could still not lie, still. So she got up and walked the bare floor, her hands over her ears, to shut out the maniacal tune. If the music had affected Miss Bosvane so cruelly the night before, what would it do to her tonight when she was so sick, so feeble? Chapter 15. Blair awakened to find a light on the floor beside him and someone bending over him. Bathing his head with cool water, it felt good. Too good. Although it burned deeply into his wound, at least he was not going to be left here to die. He looked up. It was Nita who was ministering nurse, and her hands were as gentle as a mother's on his bruised head. He was in a stall. He decided a stall in the stable. He recognized the feed boxes, the other stalls dimly outlined in the glow of the lantern. The floor was bare and dusty, apparently long unused. The big woman was kneeling by his side. McClure had said she was dumb, but he might be mistaken. "Who hit me?" he asked feebly. She did not answer, but kept on with her tender laving of wound. To see her, he had to turn his eyes, and this hurt him terribly. "Is Miss Lord safe?" he tried again. Still no answer. "Can't you talk?" He saw her shake her head slowly. "But can you understand me?" Yes, she could understand. She nodded with quick movement of her head. He watched her unwind clean bandages and then felt her putting them about his head. "I thought I was going to be left here to die," he said bitterly. As she finished and picked up the basin of water from the floor. "Stay a minute." The woman hesitated. "Undo these ropes, will you? I can see no reason why I was attacked like a dog and tied up. I haven't done anything to Miss Bosvane. All I wanted was to ask Miss Janet to come away. I've heard ugly rumors about this house, and I didn't think she would stay here any longer. That isn't any crime, is it?" The woman did not appear to have heard and picked up her lantern. Slowly she made her way out, Blair watching her as she went, seeing the light recede in the distance. A door closed lightly. He was alone again in the darkness. He felt stronger now. Perhaps the bathing had helped his head. He had a knife in his pocket, small, but it might do to cut these ropes if he could get at it. He could not, however, although he tried time and time again, still exhausting his bit of strength. He lay muttering to himself on the floor. A stable. He was a prisoner in a stable, and his car was out in front of that house. He was hungry. He decided, half-starved. All he'd had to eat all day was part of that dry chicken sandwich, the sandwich which was wrapped in the invitation to visit the big house for dinner. He saw a light coming toward him again, and Nita appeared in the stall, her lantern on a small tray of food she was carrying. "I was just thinking how hungry I was," he called to her, half gaily. On the tray he saw a steaming bowl of soup, a small pot of coffee, and a few sandwiches. "You'll have to unfasten these bonds if I am to eat." But Nita made no move to do so. Instead, she knelt on the floor, raised his head in her lap, and fed him the soup by spoonfuls. She followed with the sandwiches and coffee. Blair thanked her gratefully. When he had finished, he had been hungry, frightfully hungry. He was surprised how able and strong he felt now. If it were not for that confounded throb in his head, he would be himself. Again, he begged her to let him go. But the woman, after she had picked up the tray, left the stable, taking the lantern with her. Darkness and despair. Blair cursed himself and his bonds as he lay there, trying to move out but not succeeding. The knife in his pocket could not be reached. That was certain. Sudden hopes came to him as he thought of some matches in the vest pocket. If he could get at them and strike one, he might be able to see around the prison. Sitting up, slight with a mighty effort, he felt dizzy for a moment. The effort had taken more strength than he had bargained for. After he was up against the wall, wiggling himself there by inch at a time, he maneuvered until his body was against the protruding joist. By careful manipulation, he managed to push several matches from his vest pocket to the floor. Dropping to the floor, he felt around back of him until he got a match in his fingers, and then, after several attempts, struck it. He pushed the other matches into the tiny blaze with his feet, and then looked about as it flared enough to light up the stall. Before the light flickered out, he had seen heavy iron ring fastened to the manger at one end of the stall. Painfully, he drew himself to it, and after considerable fumbling about in the dark, was able to find the ring with his hands. Then he set to work, sawing the ropes back and forward across his rough iron ring. Often he rubbed his wrists painfully, but he kept on, hoping to fray the rope enough so a good about stout jerk would free him. Weak and tired from his wound and his exertions, he stopped frequently to rest, and then doggedly resumed his almost hopeless task. At least after resting fully 10 minutes from his labors, he exerted all his strength and drew his arms from his body. The rope about his waist gave way. He was partly free, but his wrists were still tied. Although he could move them about more freely, he felt in his hip pocket for the knife, but it was gone. Someone had taken it. He swore a little under his breath as he started again to saw the rope against the rusty iron. It was perhaps an hour before he was able to burst the weakened bonds from his wrists. His hands were numb and swollen from his exertions, and they hurt as he rubbed them smartly together to restore his circulation. A few minutes more, and he was free of the rope about his ankles. He arose to his feet and stretched himself luxuriously. He could scarcely walk at first, but gradually cramps left his muscles, and he was able to move around. He was still a bit dizzy from the wound on his head. Prowling about the place, he tried to make out the door through which Nita and his mysterious assailant must have dragged him. He found it, finally, a big oak door which could be fastened by an iron bar from the inside. It was open now, however, and he stepped out in the night air. Mid the darkened bulk of the big house, he saw a single small light shining, probably the kitchen, he thought, with Nita still moving about. He pondered what he should do next. Now that he was free, he must get into the house somehow, see Janet and take her away. That was certain. He regarded the lone night reflectively. Should he go boldly to the door and demand Janet? Quickly, he made his plans and re-entered the barn, snapping the bolt heavily back. He groped on the floor for a tool. He could find none, This time, when he entered the house, he would be prepared. Here was something hanging on the wall, cold iron, which when he grasped it, seemed quite heavy. It was a short iron bar. With more confidence, he slid back the bolt and stepped outside again. The heavens were filled with stars, and the crescent moon was riding high. A beautiful night for a drive. With Janet Lord at his side, he stood there a moment, looking at the sky, his mind full of tender thoughts of the girl he hoped to rescue from this queer house. A snarl in the distance, and he distinguished an animal flying toward him. One moment. In an instant, he was back in the stable, with the bolt tight against the door. That dog again! He had made a lucky escape with the bar in his hand. He slid to the floor and sat down to wait until the beast was gone. 1 second. The dog was pawing at the door wildly and growling. Again and again he jumped, and his heavy body was against the door with a thud. I shall stay here, Blair thought, until he goes. Then I shall go into the house. A dull grey light was creeping into the stable, a light that seemed cold to Blair. As he sat waiting, he shivered involuntarily, and watched it as though the big barn through the several small high windows, illumining it so slightly that the stalls appeared gossamer things made of dream stuff. 6 stalls he counted, and a door at the far end, which, when he had made it out, he rose to examine. It was locked from the outside. Finding some old straps on the walls, he wrapped them around the knob and fastened them securely with a heavy nail near the door, to make his fortress still more impregnable. He jammed a shovel under the doorknob in buttress fashion. This done, he scrambled up to the small ladder that led to the loft, and placed himself at one of the windows. The dog could see plainly, was lying at the door, his head between his paws. The loft was empty. There was not even a wisp of hay in the bare, rough floor. He had perfect view of the back of the house from his window. Evidently, no one was up there yet. In the east, the sun was rising, a big golden ball spreading broad, bright ribbons throughout the green trees. He managed, after some maneuvering, to open the window and drink in the fresh morning air. It felt good in his lungs after the stuffy stable. How long was that dog going to stay there? He must have been watching for several hours by now. Blair decided to stay in the loft by the window. Up here, he could watch the dog, and the house too. If Janet came out, he could call to her. Janet, did she know he was still here? Or did she think he was gone? She must know he was still around the house. His car was in the front. His head throbbed. When he reached the town of Bosvane again, he'd have a doctor look at it. Perhaps there was a need of a stitch or two. Blair grew impatient, waiting at the window. When were the people in the house going to get up? Would Nita bring him some more food? He was beginning to get hungry again. After all, she had not brought him very much during the night. In the still morning air, he heard the bleating of a fawn, and then a few minutes later saw the little thing run slender and frightened across the clearing in the front of the stable. A leap, a flash, and the dog was upon it. The man closed his eyes. It was as if a child was screaming wildly. Then silence. And when he opened his eyes again, the grass was stained with fresh red blood. The dog was tearing the quivering flesh from the animal's carcass. It was perhaps half an hour when the dog, his meal finished, resumed his vigil in front of the stable door, blood dripping from his jaws and his eyes burning red and inflamed. Buzzards already were circling down from the heavens. One, slighted One alighted cautiously, but the dog paid no attention. More swooped down, and in a little while there was only a small skeleton lying on the grass. He will sleep soon. He has gorged himself, Blair thought. The dog, however, did not sleep. He watched constantly, and the sun was midday in the eastern horizon before Blair saw Nita come out of the kitchen door, walk to the pile of wood before him, and fill up a big black basket with sticks. Nita, he called, leaning far out the window. She glanced up at him and then walked back to the house. The dog, at the sound of his voice, bounded to his feet and, snarling horribly, leaped toward the window. After a time, the dog, apparently realizing the futility of his efforts, resumed its watchful pose before the door. Blair smiled grimly as he gazed after Nita's big figure bending a little under the heavy load of wood. There was no doubt in his mind now that he was a prisoner. Food he probably would not get. The dog, though, could not stay forever. That is where we end for the evening. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, we have the debauchery ball coming up in Atlanta in, goodness, like 2 weeks, which means you need to get your tickets now, which means I have to get my hotel room. It's going to be crazy. It feels like time has gone so very, very quickly. Well, I do need to stop now. It is it is now 1 hour in, and I get a little tired after an hour, and I still have a few other things that I must accomplish for myself this evening. At any rate, my beauties, tomorrow join me on University Magicus, because I will be teaching the Oracle cards at 4:00. I think it's 4:00. Let me double check. Because my time lately has been cuckoo. Okay, yes, 4 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern time zones. Anyway, my lovelies, I so appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for joining me for story time tonight, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Unpleasant screams. Good night.